Hey gardeners, do you ever start your seeds on this? No doubt when starting new plants, you want to make sure you're giving them the very best start possible without overcomplicating the process. Unfortunately, overcomplicating things can be all too possible with an abundance of lousy gardening hacks floating around out there. An oft-repeated tip is to start seeds on a damp paper towel before transplanting them to soil. At various times I've tried this, and usually it seems to work out just fine. But recently I got to wondering, is it really necessary to give myself an extra step? And what exactly am I gaining by doing it this way? That's what today's video is all about. I've set up an experiment with 3 different varieties of vegetables: bell pepper, tomato, and cucumber. For each, I've started 12 seeds on a damp paper towel, transplanting when sprouted, and we'll compare those to 12 seeds directly sown. I'll show you how they grew for the following 6 weeks and share my thoughts on the pros and cons of starting them each way. Ready? Let's get growing. The setup for the paper towel method is pretty straightforward. You'll want to dampen the towel, place your seeds at an appropriate distance from each other on it, then fold it over in half to cover the top of them. From here, I like to place it in an open Ziploc bag, which allows fresh air to circulate, but it will slow down the overall evaporation. Set it in a warm place and check on it often, making sure it's not drying out and watching for new sprouts. Once you notice a taproot has begun to form, it's time to transplant. Carefully move the seedlings into a soil pot, making sure to point the taproot downwards. Tweezers can be quite beneficial for this part, especially for small seed. Try as much as you can to handle it by the husk of the seed, as the new root will be very fragile. Because of this, there's a risk of damaging fragile new roots, which could slow down growth or even risk killing the plant. Since the roots will sometimes grow through the paper towel or just become quite attached, a trick I like to do is to remove a little chunk of the paper towel along with the seed. Since it's biodegradable anyways, it can be buried with the root and spare you the risk of damaging them accidentally. I have a theory that the paper towel method is popular because it gives a gardener some reassurance about starting plants from scratch. Depending on the plant, you would normally have to wait between 1 and 3 weeks before you see any green growth pop up above the soil and get a sense of your success. But when you start on a paper towel, you have the opportunity to check on root growth, which otherwise would have been hidden from you. There's an obvious advantage here in being able to see germination rates and start more seeds sooner if it wasn't so good. Next, let's look at the 3 varieties of plants and how each method compares in the weeks following its planting. 3 weeks after starting and 11 days after transplanting, this is how the cucumber trays were looking. At this point, it didn't look like any more were going to sprout, so I thinned them out to keep the strongest plant in each cell. While stunted at first, 5 weeks after transplant, the paper towel batch has done a lot of catching up. I'd still say the direct sown ones had some additional growth, but that gap has shrunk significantly. The bell peppers seemed to show the most dramatic difference between the 2 methods. They were also painfully slow to get going. 3 weeks after starting, I was able to transplant the paper towel ones into soil. Meanwhile, the direct sown ones were off to a decent start. At the 6-week mark, our direct sown peppers are much better developed. 2 months in, and the direct sown peppers have clearly pulled away with the head start they got. The tomatoes sprouted quick and vigorously. I got them transplanted, and comparing here at the 3-week mark, there really isn't any difference to speak of in terms of size between the 2. I again thinned out to only have 1 plant per cell. They continued to look indistinguishable through the following weeks. This was a helpful experiment for me to compare how my plant's growth was being affected by the two different starting methods, and I think I've learned a lot that I can put toward future decisions. One of the first things I noticed was that starting the seed on a paper towel almost always resulted in better germination rates. I was using old seed that I wasn't expecting to have the best rates to begin with. If you have lots now, you can always sow heavily and thin out later. But especially with older seed that can be inconsistent, often I find that you might end up with one cell full of tons and other cells without any. Being able to move known sprouted ones off the paper towel into an empty cell is definitely handy. Though I love gardening, I also don't want to make more work for myself. Having to gently remove the sprouted seeds off the paper towel was definitely a bit tedious, and even though I was being careful, I'm pretty sure I accidentally killed a couple in the process. The variety of the plant can also make a big difference on whether to employ the paper towel method. When it comes to peppers, they clearly appreciated being direct sown and not being disturbed at all. Compare that to my tomatoes, where they didn't really seem to care either way. Now, I focus on vegetables, where seed is generally quite abundant and cheap, but if you're looking to cultivate other things, such as cannabis, you could be better off using the paper towel method to start. Suppliers tend to charge a lot per seed, and they can be stingy with the number they give you. In that case, everyone counts, and you want to do whatever you can to make sure they all germinate. Like a lot of things with gardening, there's no real right or wrong to it, and I'm not going to draw a line in the sand on this one. For me, I prefer having one less step, and will probably continue just direct sowing outside of the odd niche case. But what about you? Have you had better results with one method versus the other? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, thanks for watching, and happy gardening.